I think the same with Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is
agreed.
handsome, eloquent, graceful. He does these little weird dance moves that I'm sure like the left eats up. How he's very expressive. He is bright. A lot of bright, smart people who fall into this bucket of being poorly informed in today's age, their habits were like fine for getting enough information in 2012. And in today's age, they're getting bad information or not enough. He's going to be really appealing to that group of people.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm here today with Brant Elwood for, I guess, the third time on this podcast and ready for some spicy conversation. So how you doing?
I'm great, man. Yeah, good to see you, dude.
Let's get into it.
Good banner on X recently. Shout out to our homie Systemic Texism with all the workout banter, man. That's keeping me inspired.
Always fun stuff.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me.
For sure. I was thinking about you today. The past 2 days I've done a lot of farmers carries, and my forearms are cramping up so bad that I can't even hold things right now. Nice. So it's just the struggle's real. Yeah.
I posted that picture of that giant 176 pound kettlebell, whatever. Yeah, I'm imagining if I could get to the point of farmers carrying that, we'd be on a different level. Definitely not there. But dude, I went out on a limb the other day. Last time I was on, and probably every time we've talked, I'm always talking about group dynamics, and group relations conferences is one of the things we had mentioned before. There's a whole community of folks that do these very experiential, in the here and now moment conferences where it's not lecture based. I think if people go back to the time where we had Adon on with me, we were talking about those conferences. And I may have even aired this at the time, but one of my concerns over the last few years really has been watching what I would call the leftist radicalization take hold and deepen into that work. It's not really that surprising if you're in the health and services field that you see a trend towards more leftist ideology. I think liberal ideology has historically, over the last, 50 years, been really prevalent in higher ed, the therapist community, probably healthcare more and more. So it's not terribly surprising, but what has been more and more alarming to me is the level of license that conference directors and staff have had with framing group work around political ideas that are not welcoming to many people. If you're down, I was going to read this open letter I sent.
Please do.
Yeah. So that's me just trying to frame this, but in a nutshell, the group relations world is a series of these organizations that do group work that effectively and ostensibly is looking at learning about groups, trying to understand the unconscious dynamics of groups. So you go to these conferences and you sit in these groups and you do here and now work and you explore kind of what roles get taken up, what triggers people, what become taboo topics for the groups. They've been life-changing for me, and I've been concerned about this trend. And so I wrote this open letter and sent it out to everyone I could think of in the community, which is an international community. My co-author is also forwarding it to people, but here's the letter. It's an open letter to the group relations community. What is the goal of the group relations community when hosting a conference? The goal should be to facilitate learning about group processes, our own valence for specific roles, and how unconscious desires emerge and to influence groups and individuals. Or more simply and broadly, we want to learn about how groups work. Our goal should not be to insert our own political agenda, nor to constantly reframe the group dialogue to fit our political bias. The group unconscious does not care about our personal politics. The themes of the conference will naturally emerge, and we lack skill if we attempt to impose a specific, politically charged theme onto the conference. Here's the title of a recent conference to which I was invited. Struggling to Stand: Leadership, Authority, and Power as Democracy Dies. Another recent conference: denied, excluded, invisible. Systems perspectives on the politics of DEI. Centrists and conservatives will read these and immediately be turned off, and rightly so. Those who push through the discomfort will understand that they are stepping into a far leftist environment. In this day and age, they will expect immediate racism towards whites, heavy shaming towards skeptics of trans ideology, a derisive stance towards straightness, maleness, and lectures about presumed privilege, etc. The name of the conference signals that staff will be sympathetic to these energies and incapable of consulting from a balanced standpoint. It is not an act of courage to use a far leftist conference title that implies an extreme social justice interpretation of the world as the default, and then to recruit a monolithic participant pool. If this is your marketing strategy, you're falling into a trap. Side note, I was going to call it the Kimmel trap, but I didn't want to add any more petrol to the fire, as so to speak. You're digging yourself more and more into catering for a very specific, increasingly progressive audience. If you engage in this, you are chipping away at the integrity of group relations work as a whole in order to fill your seats in the short term. Stop it. It is not enlightened. It is not a modern application of group dynamics. It is definitely not encouraging diversity. It is cult-like groupthink that turns off reasonable, free-thinking people from engaging. It attracts ideologues, sycophants, and those who are willing to play along with such behavior. Group relations work has the ability to illuminate, and it does not belong to the right or left. As a community, we should be principled in this concept. More awareness of the group unconscious and how our roles manifest is good for society as a whole. There's an opportunity to reach across the aisle with this work. It is needed badly at this historical point in time. Sincerely, Brent. Drop that one on him. BCC.
Have you got any response yet?
I've gotten a couple. Cordial. A lot of these folks are, people I've known for a while who, a couple of them wrote blurbs for my book. They're on the back of my back cover, and so this is kind of out of nowhere. And I just went hard. I'm telling you, man. So after Charlie Kirk got shot, something just flipped in me. I didn't go buy a Bible. I know a lot of people there's been a lot of Christian revival, which I think is a good thing. But I don't give a fuck, man. I'm going to say the things that I think are true, and I'm going to be direct and blunt, and I'm not going to be cowed into shying away from that. I'm just I'm not going to do it anymore.
I love what you're doing. What's coming up for me right now, I've been on kind of a kick lately reading about deconstruction. So there's political deconstruction. There's a lot of deconstruction in the church. And one thing that the way it's always framed is we're just asking questions. We're kind of neutral. We don't have a thumb on the scale, blah, blah, blah. And then someone like you comes along and you're actually you do have a thumb on the scale. You're extremely biased. You're far left wing. You're very anti-conservative. And then the response kind of changed. Well, you're actually confused about where the middle is. This far left wing is the kind of middle neutral position from what they're presenting.
Dude, there's a scene that lives in my mind rent free from a movie that I wouldn't even recommend. It's Scarlett Johansson and whoever that guy is who played the New Age Darth Vader villain.
Kylo Ren?
Kylo Ren, yeah, that guy who
I don't know his real name.
But the movie's called Marriage Story. But one of the lines in there is it's his lawyer talking to him, and the guy, this couple is splitting up, and they were trying to be very reasonable and civil at first, but then the lawyers get involved, and this guy's talking to the man, and he's like, "Look, dude, you don't aim for what's reasonable, because they're gonna come in with batshit crazy over here. They're gonna steer it so far out that if you come in with this is the reasonable and they go over here, where you end up is somewhere in crazy land where you're getting extremely taken advantage of." That's not the exact quote, but that's the idea. Yeah. And this is what we're seeing with those conferences is ideas that would have been completely vanilla, no one batting an eye 10 years ago, are now considered fascist or far right for this loud subset of the population, and they're trying to frame the Overton window in such a way. The move is not to compromise with somebody that's out in la la land. Do not let somebody who is delusional get to write the rules of engagement for conversation. That's not a winning strategy.
Have you like recently read Bill Clinton's platform from 1996?
I saw the post going around the last couple
It
days.
sounds
right?
like a Trump platform.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. No, it's wild, man. And even, I mean, dude, people even forget that Obama was like
Yeah.
not for gay marriage, as he.
Yeah.
You have this narrative, and I'm not like a Trump fanboy. I don't even really consider myself a Republican. I do consider myself a centrist, and by today's standards, I think folks would call me a conservative. But I like grew up progressive and liberal, and but what the narrative is that Trump's a racist bigot, and Obama was this like beacon of civil rights, moving civil rights forward. And the actual data is that he was against gay marriage when he came into office, and Trump appointed the first openly gay cabinet member. It's like, how do you make sense of these two? There's some chicanery involved. The other thing I wanted to say is, if we go back to what I was talking about with the framing of the conferences, with steeping it in deep social justice language and signaling that to anyone who joins, there's a deeper problem. And I didn't say this in the letter. I kind of wish I had, even though I think it was important to keep it sweet and short. There's a responsibility of staff at these conferences to allow people to have their projections. And if you present the conference as, hey, we're here to learn about groups, and we keep it pretty neutral, then you allow for that to happen. You allow for me, if I have problems with authority, or if I'm gonna project my unintegrated mom energy onto like the conference director or whatever it is, I'm able to do that. I'm encouraged to do that by it's a blank canvas. If you frame it as like, hey, we're the good guys, we're about social justice, not only are you kind of a magnet for certain people and a repelling force for others to join the conference, but you're tampering and putting your thumb on the scale around like what types of projections people are going to experience, is my belief. I think that's a subconscious effect, but it's a way of avoiding the unpleasantness of potentially being the bad guy, right? Like if the conference directorate and the staff all are like very much like, we're on the right side of history, and have that mindset as they're crafting the conference, that shapes the type of projective landscape you're going to get. And so it's like a dereliction of duty in that sense.
Since coming to grad school about 3 years ago, this question keeps coming up on my mind: is what are we even doing here? And you talk about our goals are, we got to dismantle capitalism and deconstruct whiteness and all this stuff. And I came here to be a therapist, and I feel like it's the same way with groups. Like you would probably say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, purpose of groups is to improve your interpersonal communication skills and, understand the dynamics of how you fit into certain groups. And it's like, okay, yeah, but really our first priority needs to be this political activism. It's like, it's like we forgot like why we're even here.
It's presumptive because the whole, it's putting the horse or the cart before the horse, basically, because this is relevant to the world of therapy too, right? Like, the assumption, a good assumption in group work, is that the group maneuvers us and manipulates us without our permission, and it plays on our fears and our insecurities, and it pulls us into these roles. And we need to be very open and curious about that. What I'm seeing instead is that even before the conference starts, people are like forcing their framework upon it, and they're being already used by the larger societal framework. There's, it's like extremely arrogant to believe that you can impose your theme onto this group that hasn't even formed yet and is going to have its own unconscious. It is like the antithesis of a deep understanding of the work to push that. So, yeah, it shouldn't be complicated to say, hey, we're here to learn about groups the unconscious forces and the desires in groups and the roles that emerge without our permission that we get sucked into, right? Like, why do you always end up being, like for me, surprise, surprise, like I do end up being like the confronter or the challenger fairly often. And group relations work has allowed me to explore that, has allowed me to kind of see the dark sides in that, right? Like being used as a vessel, like the tip of a spear for any sort of group confrontation. There's like a power in that. There's an enjoyment that I get from it. I end up like co-signing it on an unconscious level. And there's also drawbacks, I'm on a physiological level, if we're in a group and I get recruited into fighting some battle for the group, like, yeah, my blood pressure is probably higher. I'm probably like rocking cortisol levels that others aren't. They've done studies on this with like the chimp stuff we've talked about before, where when you're in a prominent role, when you're like vying for any sort of like alpha position or power position within the hierarchy of primates, like your cortisol levels are crazy higher. But there is also like power dynamics that they're tempting as well. I'm going on a rant, but my point is that what was my point? We were talking about just, like the arrogance of kind of preempting that. Like, we just need to be curious about groups. If we're going to, what is the claim? Like you said, what are we doing here? Are we studying what happens with groups? And are we openly curious? Or are we pushing a political agenda that we've already decided is the correct answer we want everyone to get to?
I think coming from a therapy perspective, it's drilled into you how unethical it is to put a thumb on the scale for your client. So like if for example, if I said, hey, subtly or overtly, like my client comes in, I think part of what's going to help you is start voting for Donald Trump, or go to church. Like, they drill into you how terrible that is. Like, that's unethical. They let you know like constantly how that type of stuff is bad. But challenging a client on their white privilege, something like that, well, that's kind of part of our necessary journey. And it just seems so, I feel like you could apply the same thing to groups. It's not your job leading a group like that to put a thumb on the scale. That just seems so unethical. And if it were in the other direction, it would be so obvious.
What's the excuse or the reasoning given by anyone for why you would ever challenge someone to recognize their white privilege in a therapy session?
So the biggest book that pretty much counseling students across the country use is Counseling the Culturally Diverse. Right now we're in the 8th edition. It's Daryl Wing Sue. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but that's a big one. And the entire book is just a primer on critical race theory. It's essentially like none of your clients can truly be psychologically free until we've dismantled these systems and structures that are causing oppression. And so they kind of take you through this whole journey to where it's essentially presented as though all the work you do in therapy is kind of tinkering around the edges, essentially helping a client, think differently. If you're practicing cognitive behavioral therapy strategies, you're really just tinkering around the edges, because the real problem for all your clients are the capitalist system or whiteness or the patriarchy or what have you. And it's like, you have some degree of activism in the therapy office, like we're talking about, but also you're expected to have a lot of what's called advocacy. Be a political activist is kind of like your full-time job outside of the therapy office. So it's this bizarre understanding of what therapy even is.
So does that imply then that if your client is a, like Black Muslim little person, that there's no work to be done? Or like, what is the...
No, you need to like make them very well aware of how oppressed they are. Of course. So anything like cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of, this is very controversial, but for a lot of people considered the gold standard. So for one, you'd have to acknowledge objective reality. That's a big no-no if your client's a racial minority or something like that. You also ask the client to take some degree of personal responsibility for their life. Again, that's part of whiteness. That's very problematic. So yeah, it's regardless of the race or gender or anything of your client, like, they're trying to dismantle the most effective forms of therapy.
Right. Yeah. Did I pitch you on the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem book already?
No, what's that?
Ooh, masterpiece. The exact antidote or opposite of what you're talking about. It's Nathaniel Branden. Um, I think it's a criminal that that's not a lens that's taken more actively by graduate school and just therapy in general. Um, it's a masterpiece. I highly recommend that. Six
Adding it
Pillars
right
of
now.
Self-Esteem. Yeah. I think the audiobook is only like 3.5 hours. So that's like pretty manageable. It's a lot of, CBT type of principles, but he really is looking at psychological health effectively through this lens of self-esteem, which he defines as a combination of actual self-efficacy. How does he? I could go grab it. It's on the other side of this wall right now. But so I can't remember the phrase he uses off the top of my head, but it's like the believing in your basic goodness is like one component, and then actual reality-based self-efficacy is another. So you can't just this whole like early 90s kind of push. I don't know if you had this, but having like these moms and folk and counselor people come in and basically try to frame it as like, you got to believe that you're a good person and you gotta, that's like hollow and empty if it's not also reinforced and supported by information from the environment, right? So you can't have good self-esteem if you're incapable of meeting your needs in whatever environment you're in.
I got to be honest, like when you said self-esteem, when I heard that, that's what came up for me. I was like,
yeah,
Brant doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's pushing that. And I was like instantly turned off. But then I like understood. I work with a lot of drug addicts. And so, it's like, it's nice to say, I want to think happy thoughts about myself, but you have to kind of change you've been living a bad life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have to change the reality of that. You have to do esteemable things in order to get self-esteem. You can't just like smoke crack and, steal from your parents or whatever.
Dude, this book, if you read it, and I mean, I've read it multiple times. I'd probably due for another reread. I would go as far to say is that it's like a tragedy that idea of self-esteem has been co-opted and like turned into this smarmy little mantra based thing. And I'm with you. Like that was it. The word has a weird association, and the fact that that's been allowed to happen. I mean, you got to just read his book. It's a shame that that concept has been allowed to be so marginalized. It's central to, in my opinion, any sort of therapeutic work, any sort of coaching work, really. He gets really deep into looking at how this relates to avoidant mechanisms. Like just a quick and dirty example would be if you have a deficit in self-esteem, and you'll see these people all the time, they'll get to a certain point in life. They may even experience like pretty great amounts of success temporarily, but there's an inherent responsibility required of you once you level up. And your subconscious knows this. And if it believes that you are not either worthy or up to the task, either of those, right? Like that's the basically deserving goodness and also self-efficacy. If either of those elements is out of whack with the like success you're achieving or the aspirations or even the goals you're setting for yourself, like you're going to find self-sabotage happening. Guaranteed. He is very, so I think about Nathaniel Branden when I'm even like writing a letter like the one I shared at the beginning. He's very direct, very blunt, very honest, and doesn't use a lot of filler words. And so he has these like just banger quotes left, right, and center in that book. And I mean, it's one you got to read and then chew on. And to me, it was one of those big moments where, you realize that this is like a lens that you can use and basically see almost any situation that you're working with clients. And you can use it for organizational management techniques around like coaching up people and understanding the deficits. His claim is not that self-esteem will make you happy and fulfilled, but the inverse, you're never going to be happy and fulfilled if your self-esteem is not intact. He also talks about, he has this really cool idea around, there is a two-way feedback system. So if you have high self-esteem, then you're more likely to make decisions that are in integrity and promote this more positive idea of yourself. So if you have positive self-esteem, you're more likely to be able to have the courage to say something hard and be honest and have a difficult conversation. And also, if you have high self-esteem, you're more likely to believe that can go well. So you take these risks and then you experience success, and that reinforces your self-esteem. If you have low, and so the opposite is true too. If you have low self-esteem, you avoid these hard decisions, and that reinforces this idea that you're incapable of having them, and you sink down into passivity. And so it's both your self-esteem influences your behavior, and your behavior influences your self-esteem. And when your self-esteem is high, it reinforces behaviors that encourage building on your self-esteem. And when your self-esteem is low, that discourages self-esteem, basically. It's but it helps. It helps, like you talking about addiction, right?
Yeah.
You don't you don't have people in active addiction with high self-esteem that can be like inflated or temporarily delusional or manic.
It's like a false.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he talks about that too. Mm-hmm.
So I want to get into something I've been thinking about a lot, and that's I think it sounds like what you're saying. It's the same in kind of these group dynamics, not courses. What do you call them?
Conferences. Mm-hmm.
Conferences.
Yep.
I see this in like certain group therapy. It's true, like they're using it K through 12 all the way up through graduate level education. It's true of diversity training, and that is using these type of therapeutic techniques in like a quasi-clinical way to push an agenda. So you get people kind of broken down in this place of vulnerability, and then when they're kind of open and receptive, you kind of open them up, then you shove this ideology into them. Do you see that, like hijacking vulnerability, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I agree. I think it's especially sad or tragic because, you're talking about techniques that are supposed to be in service of like learning about ourselves, in service of introspection and self-knowledge. And so to like twist those and to weaponize those is, it's effectively a violation of like do no harm principles. Certainly at least at a level.
Yeah, definitely. So we had a conversation on X about it was having to do with there's a lot of possibly propaganda, certainly messaging about how like all or a significant portion of the violence comes from the right wing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, shouts out to A Strange Loop. Anyone who follows you or me, for that matter, my account's way smaller, but who doesn't follow A Strange Loop, you guys should check out what she's been doing. There's so much to say about this, but I really do like to think about things from like a game theory perspective, which is what I mean by that is like thinking about the social setup and like a game effectively, like the pieces are on the board. And one of the things that the left has done really well is placed a lot of pieces that are reinforcing whatever the leftist narrative in places like academia. Wikipedia is a big one that keeps popping up right now. But also, creating these very shareable charts and graphs that kind of display whatever point. And, I think there's been, just the I think it was the ADL or Cato Institute. I forget.
I think it was originally Cato, I believe.
There were two, actually. The ADL put out one that was had some misleading graphics or was like, right. It was counting like prison gang violence as right wing. Something just absurd. Yeah.
Yeah.
They know at this point, this is like all you can model this under like this game theory thinking, is they know that the game at this point is the battle for the minds of these like people in the middle who are low information and not seeking to fact check effectively, but are influenced by like quick sound bites. And if you can put this colorful graphic in front of them, you're gonna reinforce the narrative that they're already comfortable with. Or if they're on the fence, it's a data point that moves them towards your narrative. And they know that they can get away with sloppy work within their cohort. There's the whole Darvo, like the deny, avoid, reverse victim and oppressor. So whoever calls out that data, they're the problem, and they know that they can make it murky and messy enough to where these people in the middle who they get to and they influence, once it gets debated, they can just make the water muddy enough that those people will not care anymore. So the ADL is guilty of that. There's this other guy, I think his name's Alex or something, and he put together like a snazzy little, I mean, the graphics look good, right? Like it's a shareable graphic that demonstrates ostensibly that the right commits more violent acts in the last 40 years, I think. He conveniently, and one of the valid criticisms was he conveniently starts tracking the data right after the Weather Underground attacks. So after like a decade of high amounts of leftist violence, he's like, okay, we'll start 1975. Sound good, everyone? And A Strange Loop really just dug in and did an absurd amount of work digging into these. I was curious, so I just did a few spot checks, and I think I found like out of 3 that I looked at, one of them was categorized correctly. One of them was like potentially categorized correctly, but the methodology that he used to categorize this person who was schizophrenic with leftist ideology and unfit to stand trial, evidently, according to others, he is using a double standard there, and people who were schizophrenic but committing violence from the conservative side or from the right side would be counted in the data. I didn't double check that piece, but the third one was like pretty egregious in my opinion. It was looking at a Chinese citizen, I think, or a Chinese man who was had connections to the CCP and did a mass shooting at a Taiwanese church where, the CCP does not want to recognize Taiwan's independence. It's like a real hot topic. So this is like communist ideology fueling murder. We can call that,
Communists are notoriously right wing,
right? So I think his specious argument was that that's not going to be coded either way, and it's absurd. So I'm just looking like, I don't know if anyone's a baseball fan, but batting like missing 1 out of 3 there is like pretty bad for a spot check data, and also just his resistance to what is very clearly something that should be left coded. I'm going to go ahead and assume that he's making lots and lots of mistakes. And again, shout out to Strange Loop for following up with that. I know you and I are supposed to have a conversation with her, but she's putting it out there, and it's a lot of courage there, to like stick with it, keep fighting, keep pushing, a lot of stamina.
Oh yeah. In researching my book, I looked at, Wilfred Riley's done a lot of work on this as well.
Dude, he's the man. I love that guy.
He's the man with Hate Crime Hoax is incredible. I have it over here somewhere. Gosh, I think it's like so many white on black crimes are just assumed to be right wing, but like black or Asian or Hispanic on white is considered apolitical. Right. It's just kind of like throw it in the basket to just kind of rack up as many numbers as you can. Yeah.
And even, the Irina Zaruska, if I'm saying her name correctly, I know I butchered it on our last one, but the Charlotte train murder, I don't know where that ends up in the data pile, but depending on whoever's compiling the ideology, because he's like got deep delusional, whatever, schizophrenia, I think it was, like schizoaffective disorder maybe. But he clearly knew he was stabbing a white girl, like using his words, right? Like after he stabbed her, he said, I got that white girl. And he was like, if I'm correct, and this is what I've like read and seen, is that he was, kind of like rehearsing how he was going to like justify it. And so even if somebody is delusional, if they're being fed permissive propaganda around violence towards white people in general, which is absolutely the case when they call conservatives fascists wholesale, that is like real violence that's influenced by left-wing ideology, right? Like, I get that we have to draw a line somewhere in terms of how we report it, but like these things happen, and I wonder,
It's hard for me to believe it's completely unrelated that we spent decades saying, all white people are racist, white people are the oppressor, whiteness is the problem with everything in civilization. And then something like this happens. It's hard to believe there's no connection there ever,
Yeah. And again, this comes down to a methodology problem, but it is left-wing violence towards the population if you have someone who's allowed to commit 14 arrests and you know that they have a violent history and you put them back on the street. How do we classify that? That is absolutely left-wing policy and ideology leading to like a death. How do you get around that? That's a real thing.
I don't know if you read Michael Schellenberger's San Francisco, but
Nah.
it's like, huge portions of entire big cities, they're just falling into chaos. And it's not just completely random. It's because of those specific progressive policies that cause, just people with, legs rotting off because they're, injecting drugs on the street or just living in filth, It's like, that's not just an accident that just, happens accidentally.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder what, obviously there is a large contingent of Dems who are not willing to even admit that policies around creating like welfare state and incentivizing Black fathers to be pushed out of the home in the whatever 60s and 70s, that I think there's resistance to even consider that was part of what we're seeing now in terms of fatherlessness and some of these like prison epidemics and all that. But I wonder if there is some admission behind closed doors or some movement towards like, hey, look, our permissiveness towards crime, our permissiveness towards drug use is not working. I would imagine so. And I think publicly they need to push back, but or I'm getting bad information. I don't know.
I feel like that's happening. I feel like Gavin Newsom is trying to pivot. I feel like the Young Turks are having a partial pivot.
Which ones?
Well, like turning on the trans movement specifically.
Cenk, or is that how you say his name? Cenk?
Anna is who I'm thinking of.
Oh, sure. Yeah. She
said a hard pivot.
Yeah.
And then like Ezra Klein and like the abundance movement, I think none of them want to admit that they were wrong, but they want to like rebrand to some degree. You see that?
Ezra Klein I was thinking about him today, which it bothers me that I was even thinking about him, but he's like Ellsworth Toohey from The Fountainhead. You ever read that one?
No, I haven't.
Dude, that's a good book. It's Ayn Rand, yeah. Okay. Just a quick side note, Nathaniel Brandon, who I mentioned, she mentored him. And also they had some sort of like romantic affair type of thing that she
was
briefly
spicy.
discusses. Oh yeah, for sure. But there's a character in that book that is like effectively like the Marxist villain who is this mastermind behind this decades-long plan of like undermining meritocracy. It's a little bit like cartoonish, but it's also really good. And the character's name is Ellsworth Toohey. Dude, that's Ezra. To me, that like Ezra Klein has like that kind of energy. He is. I remember. I think I first heard him on Sam Harris's podcast, and he makes my skin crawl.
Okay.
Him and Gavin Newsom are like the two personalities that I like.
Fake?
Well, I think they're both dangerous because I think so partially because of the things that I have to grudgingly admire in them, right? Like Ezra Klein is like, he's got his finger on the pulse. I think he is like charismatic and like understands that maybe a pivot is necessary here. He's strategic. He's eloquent. So that's going to be very compelling. Even though like his philosophy and some of the things he said are like rot. It's like corrupted rot. That's really strong language, but like if you hear that conversation he just had with Ta-Nehisi Coates, where he's Yeah. So this is like on the internet now, a bunch of like, but he basically just casually talks about how like the conservatives have these views around like women and trans that we would consider like morally wrong, and like this is like clearly is still very, very far in this ideological camp. He's not like internalized any sort of theory of mind that guys like you and me are like, look, man, we don't hate anyone for expressing like dressing how they want or what. Like my issue is like, I don't want to participate in your fantasy. I don't think that's good for you. I think it's really bad for kids to be exposed to this social contagion at this vulnerable age. And I think women need to have their own spaces and their own sports. Like, what is radical about that? Nothing is hateful in that. But you get just a sense when he's talking to Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's this like explosive like race baiter guy. Or if you ask anyone on the left, he's like this amazing and beautiful prophet who is speaking truth to power and pointing out the oppression in the system. Take your pick. But yeah, you see like the mass slip there where he's still like fully captured Ezra Klein. His pivots are strategic and political in nature. I think the same with Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is handsome, eloquent, raceful. He does these little weird dance moves that I'm sure like the left eats up. How he's very expressive. He is bright, and he's good at like interacting with the other side, whether that's like the rage bait with the Trump tweets and all this stuff, or like having Charlie Kirk on his podcast. He's a real, he is, I don't look at like Kamala has faded, her star has faded. And I think that even legacy media has like turned on and criticized some of the stuff that was coming out in her book. I'd be surprised if she makes any sort of run back. Gavin is like presidential.
Yeah, he's the guy.
He's presidential. A lot of bright, smart, a lot of bright, smart people who fall into this bucket of being poorly informed in today's age. Their habits were like fine for getting enough information in 2012. And in today's age, they're getting bad information or not enough. He's going to be really appealing to that group of people.
See, I feel like Gavin Newsom, Ezra Klein, those are people who are very strategic in their rebranding. It's like a marketing move. Like there's no heart change there. It's like, it's kind of like, people would joke in the 90s, Bill Clinton would decide policy by putting a finger in the air, see which one the wind's blowing. I think that's what they're doing. But I think someone like Anna Kasparian, it seems like a more genuine heart change. I don't know if you heard her story. She got like sexually assaulted by a homeless man. And then she talked about it. People called her a racist. She goes, I never said the guy's race, but he was white. Like, why are you accusing me of being racist? I mean, she I think saw the other side of the left. And I think she's kind of awakened a little bit.
Yeah. I think the path for folks that are centrists with a leftist tendency that might be open-minded is really to just expose and without it too much narrative, like show them who the Dems are. and I mean that like there's a lot of deep level extremists like the Mamdani type of talks, like give him a microphone and let him talk a lot and then show it to, like my parents, for example. Like I just like, or I don't want to bring anyone specific into this, but just the people that are not going to see those things because like CNN is going to not clip the ones that come out real crazy. Like you're not going to see it on CNN. Maybe you will, but I get the sense that boomers who are old school liberals probably don't know that Kamala Harris just admitted straight up to discriminating against Pete Buttigieg for being gay because she didn't think strategically America could handle it, kind of thing. It's like, well, okay. That's not a good look. And it's like, that's the mainest of the mainstream Democrats, right? Kamala Harris was your presidential candidate. And she's thinking that way. So where are they going with this? How do we start off here? Oh yeah. Just like showing, like, so Anna, what's her name? Anna K. I can't remember. Kasparian. Yeah. And I think Cenk Unger, or what's his name?
Uyghur, I think it is.
Cenk Uyghur. I'm probably butchering his name.
Yeah.
But he's had what seems like a very genuine experience wrestling with Charlie Kirk's assassination and seeing the responses to that from like his side. That was my sense based on pretty limited data, is that he's having like a genuine human experience and like being introspective and wanting to stay respectful, which I'm, you know, that's okay. And like, we need to have, I've posted about this a bunch on Twitter. We need to have like ways of allowing grace for folks that want to explore some of those ideas. It shouldn't, the Malcolm Gladwell is type of thing is a little different. I don't know if you saw his, where he came out and apologized.
Yeah.
I'm a little more with J.K. Rowling on that. Like, that seemed like J.K. Rowling has called out Malcolm Gladwell and Emma Watson for being basically weather vanes, where it's like, oh no, the wind's shifting. Like, better get the sails up over here. And I don't admire that. And I think that needs to be called out. I don't get the sense that that's what's going on for Anna Kay or Jank. It seems like a more genuine.
Especially because like Young Turks, their audience is like your Bernie people. Like they're very progressive. So for them to come out and make these pivots, I think they had to they had something on the line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't follow the Young Turks, but isn't Hassan Piker is somehow associated with them, right? Or was?
Isn't he related to Jink?
I think so.
Like I don't follow the Young Turks, but I hear little bits and pieces.
Yeah, he's pretty out there.
He's pretty radical.
Yeah. He's like cheered on violence many times.
Yeah.
He's too unhinged to like be a mainstream politician. I hope, I should never say that. I think I go through this process every once in a while where I look at what happened on the left, where they laughed and mocked at Trump all the way up until now he is like the most powerful man in the world again.
Yeah.
And I don't want to duplicate those type of mistakes, right? Like, so I don't start with the assumption that Hassan Piker couldn't end up in office or something like that, which is, I think, a scary prospect. I think he's fundamentally anti-American and anti-Western values. But yeah, like I can imagine like people I think are really doing effective jobs of propagandizing for the left are, I think Gavin Newsom's going to be a formidable presidential candidate.
Do you see a guy like Gavin Newsom as kind of like a Bill Clinton 2.0, like your kind of moderate pro-business guy, or do you think he's hiding something more radical?
I think he's a psychopath.
Really?
I'm not a therapist, so I can't diagnose. I'm not. Yeah, no, I think he is I think he's high IQ. I think he's very charismatic. You know about him like cheating with his campaign manager's wife and stuff like that. Like, I think this is just my sense, man. Like, I just think he looks out at these people and sees like chess pieces to move around and isn't. I think he's very, very emotionally intelligent at like kind of mimicking all these things, but I don't like, man, like I think he is power hungry and very likely to continue to be successful in achieving that. I don't think he's principle based. I think he is the kind of guy that probably does and understands like doing A/B testing on his tweets and seeing how far like rage baiting gets him in terms of reach of his tweets, and then trains his social media people on how to engage that way. And like, so when these are my projections, right? Like, but when I see him all caps say Stephen Miller is a fascist, that is not a reactive thing. He knows what he's doing. It's calculated. That's how I see it. If Bernie Sanders does something like that, he's just like
shooting from the hip.
Yeah. I think Gavin is very calculating, very intelligent. He's gonna pull in lots of people that would call themselves centrists or old school liberals. I think he'll be a threat in debates. He scares me.
It seems like, kind of in the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years, one of the big buzzwords or concepts is like authenticity, be real. We want someone real, and and it almost seems like we want someone who's curated and very designed in a specific way to look like like uh like they've been created to look authentic.
Mhm.
They've been like very
Yeah.
artificially sculpted to look authentic. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, that's like what I'm saying about Gavin
Yeah.
Newsom. He's like a beautiful politician grown in a lab. You know. Uh, so we'll see, man. I mean, but if I'm having to make like predictions, I think he's going to continue to be extremely relevant. I don't think he's going to make big mistakes. I don't think he's going to make these big blunders. I think he even sensed this and knew this. Like, again, this is just my story, right? But like, there's that anecdote of him not ever even returning Kamala's call when she called him. He was on hiking and she was like going to tell him that she's taking over the presidency. I'm sure there's more to this story, but I think he's like intentionally kind of distanced himself from her. You don't like really associate Gavin with the Kamala campaign. He's his own entity. And like, I can't imagine, God, I can't imagine them picking anyone besides him to be at the current trajectory to be the candidate. I think he's like by far the most formidable.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean he's very smooth,
Very
very
smooth.
smooth.
Yeah.
Mm. So how do you think? I'm just assuming it'd be him against Vance. How do you think that matchup would go?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Vance. I think he's very, very sharp. He is. I think he has a lot of the same qualities as Gavin Newsom, except that I think he's genuine. And anyone watching this who already doesn't agree with me is going to be like, well, that guy's full of shit. He's just like our team. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I don't consider myself a Republican, but no, I think that's a hell of a matchup. Like both very, very well spoken. I think one edge that JD Vance has is the higher level folks on the right have really seemed to crack how to speak online and how to ride the crowd, so to speak, in terms of like posts on X and the type of attention that gets. Of course, there's always going to be outrage no matter what. If somebody big enough posts anything like, hey, I like blue, I like the color blue, people are going to scream at you. But like I remember I noticed this about like Elon Musk. Now he's had some egg on his face too, but folks that just have a tendency, it's like they just know how to like surf those waves, and they take a bruise and then they get back up on the next one and they surf it, and suddenly they're like right back in the spotlight. And I think JD Vance has that quality, resilient and able to command the respect and like also the empathy of like the crowd, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, presumptively that's like who I would imagine we see running, unless
I
Gavin Newsom's prediction that we have no elections anymore in 2028 comes true, which is ridiculous. Yeah.
So I love JD Vance for, like you said, his authenticity. When I saw him on Rogan, I was like, this dude has like a 160 IQ. It was just
Yeah.
incredibly intelligent. Some
Yeah.
things that concern me about Vance is he seems very open to what you call heterodox thinkers. Something like Curtis Yarvin and people that like are not real exposed to the mainstream. I'm thinking like, if Vance had the power of the presidency, is there something we should worry about in that regard? These ideas that like most Americans are not exposed to at all.
Well, I think we need to get back to a little bit. I'm not familiar with that author, but in general, again, looking at it from like a game theory or a group dynamics perspective, I think one of the things that Trump does is he like, you go on the playground with Trump, everyone's getting dirty. You know what I mean? No one's like playing patty cake. It's like everyone's throwing mud and getting dirt. And he exposed in a way like just the absolute, like the response to Trump has been people going insane and like showing how crazy they are effectively. Like JD, we need somebody, a leader that is not doing that. Like we've had that process happen, and we need, there's this idea of the king archetype in Jungian, post-Jungian type of thinking, where like generativity, uniting the kingdom, bringing people together. Like we need to be ready to have that kind of energy again here at some point. We need to continue to eradicate some of these like extremely harmful delusions and what I would call like widespread personality disordered traits on like a society level, like glorifying some of that. We've got to like correct these things still, but it's not a happy equilibrium to have a president that is posting videos of Hakeem Jeffries in a AI generated video with like a sombrero on next to Chuck Schumer or whatever. Like it's funny, but it's also rough, man. Like I think I worry, right now everything is so polarized that the legacy media is going to just like paint JD or whoever as like fascist, Hitler, Nazi, and then we end up with an extremely polarized spot still. But I think that JD has a little bit more of that ability. Like what you're talking about is like openness to experience, effectively, right? Like if we're talking about like personality factors, we need somebody at some point that is able to empathize with the other half of the country. That I think that percentage is shrinking. In my opinion, I think that's like a smaller amount of people than 3 months ago would consider themselves like full on liberals, I believe. But we need somebody that can unite and be generative and can inspire like an actual handshake across the aisle. So I think that we're like, my hope would be that we as a society are like moving into out of the storming phase of groups, right? And into like performing maybe next, or like we need to move out of this like storming phase at some point, or we will just sink into, cold civil war effectively.
That was kind of going to be my next question for you, and that is applying your knowledge of group dynamics to what's going on socially in the country. Like, what is the storming and performing phase? What does that mean?
So yeah, we talk about this in the book actually, but the Tuckman model. So, gosh, I'm gonna forget which year it was, but Tuckman. This is widely cited, and even in like family therapy. I've heard it quite a bit. But like this idea of like the forming, storming, norming, performing, and then after that original model, he added adjourning to the end. Basically, this idea that there's a progression of phases that groups go through naturally. If you're a Joseph Campbell fan, I'd almost argue that you could see it as like an abbreviated hero's journey for groups, effectively. But basically, groups come together. There's an initial forming stage. This is compounded by things like formal hierarchies, like if you're in an organization or a startup or anything where like people are coming together for the first time and there's discrepancies in powers, that will interact with the forming stage. And you'll see formal hierarchies form, but also informal hierarchies form. So the storming phase comes up next, and that's when like there's we use myth a lot when we're looking at group dynamics in our book. That's what it's about basically. And we look at like the Greek pantheon, where there's like a succession of like murders for Uranus and Cronus before Zeus takes the throne. And so there's like, that's like a good metaphor for the storming phase, is like leadership getting toppled, a reorganization, a renegotiation of the rules or the norms. Again, it could be formal or informal, but basically like a period of drama, of conflict that is needed. You cannot like skip that form. You cannot skip storming and then get to these other stages, later stages of like the group performing effectively. So the next one is norming and then performing. And this is not, and then adjourning, sorry, but this is not like a complicated concept. And it's a very just basic framework. But what can be helpful for therapists that I've seen who are working with groups is, when you have a really rough week, a lot of the time taking a look at this and being like, oh, okay, I think the group is like storming right now. That's what's going on. It's not that I suck as a therapist. It's that we are experiencing this tension as like a natural part of this group formation. And there are some boundaries that need to be renegotiated and some roles that are changing. If we take that lens and look at the societal level, I don't view this as just like a static linear progression of groups, right? Like a country is going to like continue to like revisit some of these during different phases, right? Like, but storming seems like a pretty good descriptor of the last 10 years in American politics to me.
What do you think an ideal outcome is? Like, I know you have certain, policy or candidate preferences, but just in terms
Yeah.
of like a group dynamics, it seems like there's so much incompatibility where there's just hatred, like
Uh-huh.
people cutting off family members. Like, from a group perspective, how do we like heal or,
Yeah.
create a cohesive whole?
Okay. So I think ideally we have folks continue to feel more and more emboldened to both call out radical right wing stuff, which is absolutely a thing. There's like an increase in hardcore malicious, racism. You see it on the internet. I see it. I don't know enough about the Groypers or whatever to really like dig in and make a stance, but like that super far right ethno state ideology is not going to be good. So that needs to be called out too. I know Megan, oh my God, Megan Kelly, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Megan Kelly was in a debate now with a few conservatives around that. And like, how much do we permit like some of the stuff that Candace Owens is doing or create some separation? So I do want to say that, like, I think that needs to be called out too and kept in balance. And then I think that more and more people in the middle need to continue to be exposed and understand how absolutely toxic and insane the leftist ideology is. The leftist ideology has been way more successful recently at infiltrating deep institutions. And so that like cleansing process is going to be dirty, continue to be dirty, messy. Those views need to be exercised from polite society, right? Like we cannot, it needs to become like effectively a laughing stock to come into a room at a university and try to argue that that men can be pregnant. Like, fuck you. So that's got to happen, and that's like the important one. I say the first piece around the far right stuff first because I do want to like acknowledge that as somebody that's centrist conservative-ish, right? Like I do think that is important, right? I think that both of those need to just become less and less seen as valid. It needs to become trendy to shit on both sides of that. Like neither one of those is acceptable. We need to, and then we need to see like legislation and a commitment that reaches the larger cities around policy that is more firm on crime, that is more firm on boundaries in immigration, that is defensive of women's rights to spaces and not pandering to ideologues around like trans ideology. That's this process is not complete until we're seeing it affected in cities. And I always was kind of trained under this idea around like assertive communication and like we don't use shaming language here in these like therapeutic environments where I was working. I think people need to feel ashamed of some of the stuff they were espousing, right? Like at the very least, I think there needs to be deep accountability taken. We live in the era of receipts, and so it's going to be different now than it would have been in like the Salem witch trials, where it's like a year afterwards, everyone's like, I remember it was kind of crazy last year, but now it's like, hey, you said this. Yeah, we gotta be honest about that. Like more and more people need to go through the process that Anna Kay went through. I don't mean the sexual assault part, but like just this
Yeah.
introspection. I think Cenk is doing that. We need to continue to call out these like weather vane people, and like Malcolm Gladwell, saying he was afraid to like say the emperor has no clothes effectively. Like, well, yeah, you're a coward, and
Mhm.
you know, kind of cool that you're saying it now, but it's way lower risk. I don't see it. I'm waiting to see the courage sustained, and then we need to have a way of like granting grace and forgiveness, right?
Hmm.
So that's a lot of stuff. But
That's
I think if you're just gonna give me like these quick nuggets,
yeah.
when we see policy change, um, I'll feel good when we see some of these policies like really enacted in cities, and like currently blue cities, I mean, and when we see both a disowning of radical, and I mean actual radical right wing ideas, like violent right wing ideas, they're out there. Um, what I would call like malicious racist ideas, and then like the left is just a bigger problem. But we're not going to be at any sort of equilibrium by just like owning the libs. Like we have to like be principle driven and have this idea of like what are the Western values, and we need to basically have more people agreeing on those.
I see a lot of nastiness on both sides, but like a lot of the right wing nastiness is coming from anonymous accounts that are just basically trolls. Like that's not always true. There's some like well known people that are saying terrible things, but like on the left, it's people who run institutions, people who control
Yeah.
academia, and a lot of corporate sector, nonprofits,
Yes.
Hollywood. It seems like there's an asymmetry of the nastiness in terms of how much harm you can cause with your power.
Yeah, I think that's another good metric to look at. Like, I think we're not getting back to any sort of. In fact, this would be a scary thing to happen, where we feel like the culture war has been toned down and like we're returning to sanity. If you show me stats that say that 98% of professors are hyper liberal, we're not done. It's like that Kobe meme where it's like, job finished, job ain't finished. Like, there has to be an addressing of that. And I think on the last podcast, I was like pretty bold in saying these higher ed institutions are captured beyond repair in the form that they are in, with the administrative bloat and with the practices of discrimination and the deep ideological corruptive capture from professors up through the admin and the management. Like I don't see it getting. It's not something you just like clean up nicely in a couple of years. It's like got to be reshaped drastically. We need to have. There's probably a critical threshold, and it's not like half and half. I disagree with. I think Robin was the one who was saying we need to get equal representation of viewpoints, and
Oh yeah,
I don't agree. I mean, that's like you're just talking about reverse DEI at that point,
yeah.
and I'm not into that. I think there's a critical threshold, and it might even be like 10%. Like it is a huge problem if in a room full of professors, they all feel confident that there is not a single conservative there, and they can just let loose with insane, like Marxist revolutionist ideology and like work each other up. They need to be like, okay, there might be like 2 conservatives in here. Yeah, maybe it's like 10%, but it's getting to that threshold to where centrism is like normalized as the polite conversation. That's a healthy thing.
I want to get back to something you were saying earlier about grace and forgiveness, which I'm completely on board with. I think that's absolutely necessary to not hold everything against people. I used to be a leftist, and I had my, awakening, series of moments that I kind of transitioned to like a more centrist, open-minded position, I would say. I definitely believe in like grace, forgiveness, welcoming people who are, realizing the error in their ways. But I think we're going to come into this, like you said, the era of receipts, where like you tweeted, abolish the white race and kill all men. Like, I'm glad you don't believe that, but like we didn't forget that. Like how do you weigh that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I just, the model for me is like how I would proceed in a relationship, in like a personal relationship, right? Like if there's not, or even if you're in addictions work, that's another good example. Like, has there been a moral inventory taken? That's probably the easiest way to, like, the best model to use there is like, let's talk about the steps for a second. Has there been a moral, like an actual authentic moral inventory taken? And if somebody's trying to tell you, hey, I'm in recovery, but I haven't made good on like that time where I smashed your window and fucking stole your wallet and like threatened you with a knife or whatever, like still fuck you. I mean, there's a way to do that, and there might need to be some like teaching around that. Like you have to like own where you're at. You have to go through the process. I'm interested in hearing like why people felt like that was appealing. I'm basically just gonna if I keep talking, I'm just gonna describe that process of what taking accountability looks like, what taking an actual moral inventory looks like. That effectively is what I think is important. It is not healthy in any sense to allow somebody to move camp, so to speak, and like to claim a divorce from their old set of really toxic behaviors and beliefs without accountability taking place. If we're doing that for strictly strategic reasons to like just get to where the left is less powerful and like has less capture of our institutions, we should do it with eyes open. That's not like some fantastic solution to basically you're going to see continued underground behavior around that, and it's just going to wait to be expressed again. Without resolving it at a core level.
So, question I always end with is, what is an issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
Man, we talk, if at least in my circles, everything is talked about endlessly. Like, I feel like I don't know if anything's jumping out in my mind. This is talked about, so I'm not really answering your question very well, but the education system, I do think, is a core tenet. That's a pillar of what, it's related to H-1B visa discussion. It's related to employment numbers. It's related to tech evolution and competition with national powers. It's related to, infrastructure building, communities, policy. It's related to how people vote. So, the fact that we as a community and a society have let it get to such a point where there's extreme underrepresentation of pretty normal views. I think that's one of the key areas to like push in terms of the lines of the culture war,
I mean, I completely agree with that. I'm thinking, a big part of the strategy when you saw like the collapse of Marxist regimes was the long march to the institutions. We have to indoctrinate the young to kind of shift the entire collective consciousness in our favor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so funny trying to think about where it's like the thing that was permitted, that had to be permitted before any of this could take root, was the idea that the McCarthy era stuff was like neurotically driven and way overblown. That was the kind of stuff that my parents would say.
Wilfred Riley goes over that a lot.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one. He was like, no, it was pretty reasonable to arrest communists who allied themselves with the Soviet Union.
Right, and well, he's like says it didn't go far enough.
Yeah,
but it's a hell of a trick. It reminds me of that quote from The Usual Suspects, where it's like the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. And yeah, growing up, the way it was talked about in my house was, oh man, that was crazy and shameful. Like the McCarthy era stuff. It was a witch hunt. Like, oh man, the hunt for the Red Scare, like all this crap. Like, oh man. And then I go to, Berkeley and visit family, and like my parents think it's hilarious that I buy a shirt that has like said like the People's Republic of Berkeley with like a hammer and sickle, and I'm just like, cool. Like I'm a teenager, and I'm like, okay, this is what cool is. How do we, like, how did that? So that was already like firmly planted, and I'm just like amazed that they were able to spin it that way. I guess tell you one thing is it's something to keep in mind as fine balance between really holding folks to accountability and not being perceived as oppressive and neurotic, right? Like the left already says that about, well, they just call us fascists or whatever they call like whoever a fascist, and that, but really what they're saying is that you're engaging in like this overblown controlling type of behavior. And there's like a PR element to that. And somehow the McCarthy era activities like really lost that battle. And I think most like kind of suburban people will either have no opinion on it or thought that that was like a really overblown, neurotic, kind of shameful exercise in political persecution. And I don't know enough about it to like get into the details, but communist shit just stayed with us, waited, planted all these seeds, and now we're dealing with the plants that have grown up, the weeds that have grown up around our ankles. And so, yeah, like hopefully we can learn from that. Hopefully we continue to see a trend towards sanity and centrism. And in this climate, I would say conservatism is like clearly the winning side of almost all of these arguments. But it would be remiss to like fantasize that, you win simply at the polls. Like there's cultural institution stuff that you're saying. And if the narratives can't be shifted there, we're just waiting for the next round of indoctrinated kids. I mean, yeah, I could say more, but that was a pretty good rant.
I like it. Brant, this was a fascinating conversation. Love talking to you. Love to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, man, we'll be in touch, dude. And I need to get out, I need to do a little Texas trip of, lifting, barbecue, psychology conversations.
For sure. We'll get Jonathan down here.
Yeah, get Jonathan in here. Put us to shame with his farmer's walks and farmer's carries.
Yeah, those are pretty epic.
Yeah, man. Lots of good stuff to do. We get some stand-up comedy in,
Yeah, for sure. It's good here in Austin.